As Tiger Woods once famously said, well, I guess it's hello world. Or in this case, hello YouTube. Hey there, everybody. My name is Jamie. I'm a compulsive gambler, and I'm the host of a podcast called the After Gambling Podcast. If you're seeing this video, hopefully you came over from the podcast, but if you haven't, I want to welcome you, and definitely after this, feel free to check out the podcast. I share my experiences as a compulsive gambler with over 8 years of clean time to help other compulsive gamblers kind of get on the right path and to get a plan for recovery. And then a big part of what I do is also just to raise awareness. And that's what we're going to be doing here today. Just try to raise awareness about problem gambling because it is still so much in the shadows. And I'm just trying to pull it out there. And I think at the end of today's brief but thorough explanation of problem gambling statistics, maybe you'll have a better idea on why I'm so passionate about this and why I think we're just really missing the mark in so many ways. So as you see, this is going to be about problem gambling statistics and why I think using them to make decisions is a mistake. So first of all, let's look at some of those statistics. And I pulled these down from 3 of kind of the biggest countries with gambling. Obviously started here in the United States with the National Council on Problem Gambling. With Keith White does an awesome job. Just a shout out to Keith. Yeah, we're looking at this, and 60% of U.S. adults have gambled in the last year here in the U.S. And according to the NCPG, 1% of U.S. adults meet criteria for pathological gambling, which is the worst type of gambling, and basically what I had. And 2 to 3% would be considered problem gamblers. So as you see, it's a really low percentage. Let's go over to Gambling Commission, UK. 45% have gambled in the last 4 weeks. So this isn't the last year, this is the last 4 weeks. And in the UK, they've had legalized sports betting for, I think, 60 years. So this isn't surprising that folks in Great Britain love to make a bet. But yet, less than 1%, 0.8% of people age 16 plus in Great Britain identify as problem gamblers. And these statistics are from the Gambling Commission in the UK. And then finally, let's look down to our folks in Australia, Central Coast Gambling Help. And from their website, found that pretty similar to what we found before. 0.5% to 1% of Australian adults experience significant gambling problems or problems from gambling. And about 1.5% to 2% of Australian adults experience moderate risk that make them vulnerable to problem gambling. And again, that's from problemgambling.net.au. So if you want to check out those stats or any more, you can. But really the big takeaway here is that we have these numbers that show very, very, very low rates of problem gambling and compulsive gambling. And I'll get into the problems with these later, but first let's talk about why I think these statistics are underreported. And if you followed me at all, you'll know that I think they are vastly, vastly underreported. And that's the reason for this video. So first, I wanted to start off and kind of look at the problem gambler and their surroundings, the people that are surrounding them most, right? The people they're coming in contact with. So at the middle, we have the at-risk or problem gambler. And then around that, you have your people that you come in contact with most, significant other or family, your friends, acquaintances, and then work or school. And so we're going to touch on each one of these to highlight why I think problem gambling is underreported. So let's start off first with I guess probably the main one, which is significant other or family, and family. Now, I start here because as problem gamblers, this is probably the place that if we're going to reach out for help, we start here. I know in my case, I did. I reached out to family when I started having money issues, when I couldn't meet bills. And early on, I didn't tell them what the money was for. And this kind of instantly starts to show some of the problems. When we're talking to our significant other, our family, we're not telling them the full story. We're not saying, hey, you know what? I just lost all this money playing poker. Can you give me money so I can pay my rent? Because we're pretty sure that if we say that, they're going to say no. Or they're going to force us to seek out treatment after as an exchange, right? So we come up with all these lies, and we just lie and lie and lie and deceive those closest to us in order to fund our gambling habit, to continue our gambling addiction. So over time, we continue to do this. We continue to do this. And I kind of equate it to building a wall. We're building a wall to hide our gambling with each lie. And we're lying about our time and our money use and all these different things to the people that we love and care about the most. And we're just kind of pulling the wool over their eyes, and they may be suspicious about things, but we're pretty good at lying, and we get very, very good at lying. And we isolate people. We may say, hey, Mom, I need money for this, but don't tell Dad because I don't want him to worry about this because he thought that I had this bill covered. And then we may go to Dad and say, hey, you know what? Don't tell Mom about this. I don't want her to worry. You know how Mom worries. She gets worried and she'll get worked up about this. But I just need a couple bucks to make it to my next payday because my tires went out on my car. Or I had some unknown expense that comes up. And so you tell a lie. And then you tell another lie. And then you tell another lie. And all of a sudden, you're painting this picture that's obviously just full of lies. And all along, we don't want anybody to become suspicious. So we're saying, hey, no, everything's good. Everything's good. It's just this one thing. It's just this one thing. And we keep hiding and hiding and building this wall of lies. And like I said, in many cases, and probably most cases, our family members don't have any clue. I know I've met people that they've been married for 20 and 30 years, and their spouse doesn't know that they keep large amounts of cash hidden to fund their gambling problem. And so my point in this is that if the people that we are living with, our spouses, our significant others, our family, if we're able to keep them in the dark about how bad our gambling problem is, then I just don't see how any statistic is going to really tell us the full picture. I mean, how are you going to pull data out of my gambling issue when my family doesn't know? So it's just one of those things that I think this is one of those things that's kind of a light bulb moment when you realize that if we can lie to our family, we can lie to our spouse. I mean, I was 60 days before my wedding, which I'm extremely embarrassed about, but fortunate that I got caught in order to get help. 60 days before I was set to get married, and my fiance had no clue that I was back gambling. No clue. I mean, I was so good at hiding it that she had no idea. And all along, as I'm building those lies and telling those lies, I wasn't able to say, hey, you know what? I'm gambling. I need to get help. And even the few times when it did come up and I shared that, yes, this was for gambling, what'd I do? I did the typical, I'm going to promise to quit. And I would promise that, okay, this would be the last time. But as we get into some of these other things, you also were able to control your family and say, hey, you know what? This is big though. Like, I'm telling you this, but I'm worried it's going to get out. I don't want these other people to know about it. Like I said earlier, I don't want Dad to know it. I don't want Mom to know about it. I don't want my friends to know about it. And we'll get into work or school later, which is a whole nother issue. So we convince these people to kind of treat it in-house. And so many times I think families especially treat gambling problems in-house by trying to use money to get the problem to go away. And so I think that's one case where there's a huge sampling bias right off the start, because the only people being counted are the people that have exhausted all their options with their family. They don't have any other lines of credit, and their family just says no more. So we have a large percentage of people, I think, that families are treating it in-house because they don't want that shame and stigma of a gambling problem, or they don't want these other problems that we'll talk about later to come into the family issue. And so I just don't see that the numbers are being counted. I don't see how they're being counted. If they are, please tell me how I'm wrong, but I just don't see it. So next, let's move along to friends. Problem gamblers, I mean, we start having problems with our friends. First of all, we disconnect from our friends. We start lying to our friends, doing a lot of the same stuff. We may borrow money from our friends. They're very similar to significant other or family. Now, where it really creates a problem is also that, I mean, we start to isolate from our friends. And I think this is a huge problem with the gambling. We don't have the funds to go out and be around our friends and all those types of things. So we lie about, okay, no, I have work to do, or I have some other thing to do. But again, the friends, I'm not going to go as deep as the other topics, but just know, I mean, it's another source that we use them, we lie to them, we create these walls to hide our addiction. And so we're not able to tell our friends the truth in many cases, and we end up isolated. So our friends can't even help us. They can't reach out to somebody and say, hey, my friend has a gambling problem. Can you help them? And then finally, a big piece of this, let's talk about work or school. When I was talking earlier about family and treating it in-house, one of the main things, and probably maybe if you survey people, the main thing and the main reason problem gamblers, at-risk gamblers are so worried about the truth coming out about their addiction is that they may lose their job, or they may lose trust at their job. They may get kicked out of school. In some cases, school is not as big of a thing. I just put this here because obviously you have some younger kids and they're maybe using their loans for school. And so when they don't pay them, they may end up getting kicked out. But really the focus is on work, and any career that deals with any type of money or is a high trust job. We're worried that we're going to lose that. We're going to lose our job. And then if we thought our financial problems were bad before, imagine how bad they're going to get after we lose our job. And so anybody that deals with money on a daily basis or is responsible for kind of big things where there's a lot of trust, we're so worried that our family, we're so worried about our work finding out that, again, we isolate all these people to make sure that it never comes out. And so if it doesn't come out, again, this isolation, it just, in my mind, I don't see how we're getting the true numbers, knowing that fear exists, knowing that the fear of losing your occupation, if this comes out, is out there. Why? What's the benefit for somebody to come forward and talk about how they have this addiction? I mean, it's not like breast cancer or, any other disease. And I just throw those out because those are the ones where we know about we really support the people that are impacted. And we have parades for them, and we raise money for them. We do all these types of things, where gambling is this thing where you are so isolated. And that's really the reason that I wanted to bring up this whole triangle, include things like the friends, which isn't so much playing into the statistics, but just goes to show that problem gamblers just become extremely isolated. And so the more that we isolate, we just continue to feel like there is no way out, that there is no hope. And so let's forward here, segue into the impact and potential harm. Like I said, the first one is a complete loss of connection. In that triangle, we've built a wall in all directions. And when we build that wall, all that leaves is us sitting there all by ourselves. And we're sitting there all by ourselves, and all of a sudden that increase in shame and stigma is there. And we feel alone. We feel like we can't do it. And not only that, and this is where the problem gambling numbers are really harmful, is if we start to look into it and we say, oh, this is only 0.8% of the population, you think, damn, I'm really messed up. I'm so unique. I just need to figure this out, because obviously 99% of the people can figure out how to do this without having any problem. And this is one other side note. I think a lot of our statistics include everybody. Well, here in the US, if 40% of the people never gamble, why are we including them in the percentage of problem gamblers? I think we should state statistics as the percentage of problem gamblers as it relates to people that are gambling. I think obviously that number is going to be a much higher number, but I think that's something to think about, because we always like to throw out that we don't have to do more for problem gambling because it's such a small percentage, but that percentage gets a whole lot bigger if you're talking about the number of people that are actually doing the thing. I brought up before on the podcast one time, I think it's appropriate, you say, well, almost nobody dies piloting an airplane. It's like, well, yeah, but if you take out the fact that most people aren't pilots, then the percentage goes up quite a bit. And obviously, air traffic is so safe right now. It's sort of a bad example because it is such a safe industry. I'm just pointing out that if you're focusing on just one little segment of it, you're leaving out kind of the bigger picture. And then, so next, impact and potential harm. The big ones now, I mean, the first two are kind of personal, but then the next one's kind of hit on the macro level. The big time thing that it impacts is limits the amount of funding. And if you have less funding, it limits research. Now, how does it limit funding? Because obviously operators can say, hey, this isn't a big deal. It's only a small percentage, so we're going to allocate a small percentage to problem gambling. And lawmakers can look at it and say, you know what, I've got bigger fish to fry. I've got X percentage of people that are dealing with this problem and this problem and this problem. So if it's only 1%, I can't be bothered to do that. And so that's some of these potential impacts and potential harms if we don't have accurate statistics, and if we're using statistics that we kind of in our head understand are probably flawed. And the fifth one, just it continues the cycle. The more that we say, hey, it's a small percentage, again, that person in the middle, in the midst, says, well, I guess I got to figure this out because most people don't have the problem. And obviously with limited funding to create awareness campaigns, education campaigns, and treatment programs, there's not the help for those people. And there's not the research to really understand, like, okay, how can we help them better? And so these are the problems that happen if we kind of just blanket accept that it's a very, very small percentage of people. And then finally, I want to go to this, which is the end result. What's the end result of all this? And it really, like I said earlier, it ends with the compulsive gambler left trying to fix their issue alone. And it's often by returning to gamble. Because as crazy as it sounds, we see this as the only way out. We view it as a financial problem, which when you get into recovery, you realize there's a whole lot more to it. It's the emotional problem that's the underlying issue in many cases, and probably most cases. But we see it as a financial problem, and when you dug such a big hole, I mean, at one point, you have $50,000, $100,000 in debt. Why not take that chance to continue? That seems like the only way out is to go back to gambling. Because look, we're stuck there. We've built this wall of lies with our friends and our family. We've built this wall of lies with work. There's nowhere else to turn without tearing down that wall and admitting about our problem. And so our great fantasy is that we're just going to fix this by ourselves. Like I say, often by returning to gamble. And then someday we can kind of just be taller than the wall and life will go on, and our gambling problem will just continue to have existed in the past, but it will be hidden. Nobody will ever have to know about it. And so the problem with this is, we then have exhausted or feel like we've exhausted every perceived outlet for help. And I know I put perceived because the friends, family, work, those are only the three parts. Obviously, there's external sources, things like the National Council that puts on conferences, educational sessions. Each state has training sessions, or most states have places where people can go get counseling and certified counselors and recovery centers. But as compulsive gamblers, we don't see that as an option, mainly because all those things are going to take some time, and again, will lead to that having to explain where we are to friends or family, when we're better just kind of staying to ourselves, or feel like we're better staying to ourselves in order to hide our problem. And then our very, very final takeaway that I want you to go away from this with: if you're an operator, if you're a gambler, if you're a treatment person, question what you think. This is something that I picked up, and I really, really like it. I always ask myself, what if I'm wrong? So what if we're wrong? If we're wrong about these statistics, like I think we are, and I'm very confident that these statistics are underreported. And I think hopefully after seeing this, you can understand why the kind of the inside the mind of a compulsive gambler, why we aren't going to reach out for help, why we aren't going to call a hotline, and why families may treat it internally so they don't lose their source of income. So I think the numbers are underreported. If I'm wrong, and we kind of go on my assumption and we increase funding, we increase treatment, we increase research, what's the worst thing that can happen? There's a little bit better understanding and better treatment available to the problem gamblers. That very, very small percentage of people will have a boost in their quality of life, hopefully, after receiving a little bit better treatment. Now let's flip that. What if we're wrong about these numbers? Or that's kind of sad, right? I mean, if we're taking these statistics to be fact, and so that's guiding all of our research and funding. So we're saying this problem only needs this much attention. But if we're wrong and the problem is 5 or 10 or 20% larger, that's very sad. So I guess question your thoughts. Play it out, the pros and cons of what if we're right, what if we're wrong. And hopefully this moves you to start to think about this in a little bit different light, and questions whichever side you fall on, questions your gut feeling about the problem, so that hopefully we can get something where we all can work together to have much more treatment, much better awareness programs, prevention programs, in order to limit the harm. Because my hope is that we're right on the numbers. I hope that someday we'll get to the point where the numbers are very, very small. You're never going to eliminate it. I completely understand that. But I would love to see the numbers factually match up to what we think they are now. I just don't think we're there. And I think it's going to take money and research in order to get there. Thanks for listening. And like I said at the top, if you want to check out the podcast, you can find it pretty much anywhere you can find podcasts. That's not a word. Podcast. But yeah, check it out. aftergambling.com. It's on Spotify. It's on Apple. It's on Google. It's on iHeartRadio. It's on TuneIn. Like I say, it's just about anywhere you can find podcasts. So tune in, listen, let me know what you think. You can reach me at any time on social media, just After Gambling on most of the social media apps, or Jamie, Jamie, at aftergambling.com. Thanks for spending 23 minutes with me, and hopefully this has been something that creates a little bit of curiosity in you. Scratch that itch of, hey, are we really right about these numbers? Is it possible we're wrong? And how can we get better numbers? And what can we do to ensure that we get gamblers that need help? Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next video.